By the end of this episode, you'll walk the frozen streets of Petrograd, feel the fear, hope and desperation of soldiers, workers and peasants, and witness how a calculated coup in October 1917 toppled a weak provisional government, promised peace, land and bread, and plunged Russia into civil war, famine and decades of authoritarian rule. This is a story of power, ideology and human cost like few others in history. Picture a country where winter gnaws at your bones. Food is scarce and every street whispers unrest. That was Russia in 1917. Peasants struggled on tiny plots of land, barely able to feed themselves. Industrial workers laboured 12 to 16 hours a day, lungs black with smoke, wages almost worthless. Soldiers returned from World War I, beaten, sick and starving, having seen millions die on the front. The Tsar Nicholas II ruled like a distant monarch, oblivious to the suffering around him. His government was inefficient, corrupt and disconnected, creaking under the weight of a country it could no longer manage. By February 1917, the pressure was too great. Mass protests and strikes in Petrograd forced the Tsar to abdicate. Enter the provisional government, a fragile administration led by Alexander Kerensky. But his new government kept Russia in a war it could no longer afford, ignored the pleas for land reform, and failed to feed its citizens. Russia teetered, ready to fall into chaos. Amidst the turmoil, Vladimir Lenin returned from exile in April 1917, secretly aided by Germany, which hoped he would destabilize Russia. Lenin brought a radical message: peace, an immediate end to the bloodshed of World War I, land, redistribution from aristocrats to peasants, bread, food for starving workers and soldiers. Lenin's words were a flame in a dark room. The exhausted masses clung to it, hoping for relief from hunger, death and oppression. By October, the Bolsheviks were ready to act. Unlike February, the October Revolution was not a spontaneous mass uprising. It was precisely planned, a chessboard where each move had to be calculated. Targets were key locations in Petrograd, the telegraph office, rail stations, bridges, and the Winter Palace. Execution, led by Leon Trotsky and the Red Guards, armed workers and loyal soldiers moved silently, swiftly like shadows across the city. Propaganda, slogans like peace, land, bread, inspired support from weary soldiers, hungry workers and peasants desperate for land. The Winter Palace fell with minimal resistance. Provisional government leaders were arrested, not killed. Deaths during the takeover were roughly 100 to 200, but this quiet seizure of power was only the beginning. Almost immediately, Russia plunged into civil war. The Reds, the Bolsheviks versus the Whites, the monarchists, the liberals, foreign interventionists. The total deaths of the civil war, famine and disease were 7 to 12 million. The Red Terror, the Bolshevik secret police, the Cheka, hunted perceived enemies. Tens of thousands of executions, widespread imprisonment, and terror became instruments of control. And then the famine, between 1921 and 22, where millions more died from hunger caused by drought, war disruption, and state food requisition. Death toll 2 to 5 million. This was War Communism, a brutal attempt to reshape society by force, often at the expense of the very people who had initially supported the revolution. So after seizing power, the Bolsheviks set out to dismantle the Tsarist bourgeois structure and built a socialist society. These reforms were sweeping and revolutionary. So here's a list of them: women's rights and family law, secular marriage, religious marriage abolished, replaced by civil registration, no ground divorce, divorce available on request from either party, simplifying the process, basically a postcard divorce. Reproductive freedom, abortion legalised in 1920, free in state hospitals. Legal equality, women could own property, vote, enter businesses, and children born outside marriage had equal rights. And then the Xenotel, a women's department promoting education, political involvement, and rights led by figures like Alexandra Kollontai. And then education and literacy, universal education, free public schooling, core education. Literacy campaign, decree on illiteracy 1919 required all citizens 8 to 50 to learn to read and write. And then university access, entrance exams abolished for workers and peasants, vocational studies schools created. And then social and cultural changes, anti-religious policies, church property seized, Russian Orthodox Church influence curtailed, land and industrial reform, land declared social property, industries and banks nationalised. The abolition of aristocratic titles aimed to create a classless society. Public services, maternity clinics, nurseries and creches built to allow women to work outside the home. Alphabet reform, Cyrillic alphabet simplified to promote literacy. And then economic policies, War Communism between 1918 and 21, the total state control of production, nationalisation, forced grain requisitioning. And the new economic policy, introduced after 1921 to allow limited market elements and revive the economy. While some early reforms, especially around marriage and family, were later reversed during Stalin's era, these changes marked a revolutionary shift in post-1917 Russia. The Bolsheviks envisioned a Marxist, Leninist, socialist society, eventually evolving towards communism. Social beginnings, the redistribution of land, worker control of factories, and equality campaigns. And then the communist ultimate goal was a classless, stateless society. Yet, the reality diverged quickly that it was authoritarian consolidation. Lenin replaced the provisional government with the Council of People's Commissioners. And then centralized control, one-party rule replaced democracy, dissent crushed. And then alienation, workers, peasants and early socialist allies were often suppressed if they opposed Bolshevik policies. It's had a lasting impact on Russia and the world. The revolution's effects were immediate and far-reaching. It created the formation of the USSR in 1922. Russia became a one-party state under Communist Party control. And then economic and social change, industrial nationalisation, collectivisation, literacy campaigns, women's rights reforms and secular education. The political repression, Cheka and the later Soviet security services ensured centralised power. And then global influence, inspired communist movements worldwide, shaping the 20th century, including the Cold War. There was a lot of death, wasn't there? The October Revolution, although it was only 100 to 200 people, the Civil War and famine created 7 to 12 million. The Red Terror executions alone were 50,000 to 200,000. Millions more suffered displacement and starvation and political repression. So picture Petrograd once more, fog drifting over the Neva River, lamps flickering, streets empty except for shadows of red guards and whispers of revolution. A candle of hope flickered in the hands of the workers, soldiers and peasants, but that flame became a wildfire. The Bolshevik Revolution reminds us that desperation, ideology and ambition can collide with catastrophic consequences. A strategic seizure of power became a human experiment, with consequences that reshaped a nation and the world, echoing through history even today. If you like this episode, don't forget to follow, like, comment and subscribe. And just a quick shout out to our sponsors. Strong Coffee Company, protein-packed coffee for energy and clarity. Use code Vancrux1 for 20% off at strongcoffeecompany.com. And then there's More Labs, clinically proven hydration and recovery drinks. Use code Vancrux1 for 25% off at morelabs.com. And finally, liquor gummies, electrolytes and vitamins for hangover prevention. Use code Vancrux1 for 20% off at liquor.com. That's liquure.com.